Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint to self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Van. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, a life coach, meditation teacher, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution to help you reach your greatest potential. What does it mean to be in balance? More so, how do you get there? Finding your balance, whether with work and home or your thoughts and emotions, is a shift in the way that you show up. And that shift has a massive ripple effect on everything you do, think, and feel. I sat down with Alison Mandell, a work-life balance expert, to talk about how balance shows up in every aspect of our existence and how to create a form of balance that actually works for you, an individual path. Let's not waste one more second. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. We're talking about balance. It's a conversation we've had so many times here on the podcast. However, it's something that no matter how many times I talk about it, no matter how many conversations I have in private session or out in the world, it's still something most people struggle with. And so you being an expert in balance, we were just talking about blending spiritual and practical together, having that logical and mind, body, soul connection. Let's talk.
Well, I am so happy to be here with you. I am a work-life balance expert and a scheduling expert. And I also do consulting work with companies and nonprofits. And I really came to this work because I was so exceptionally imbalanced.
Mm.
I was an executive producer in television for a long time. And I did the thing that I think a lot of us do, which is that I went for the tip of the mountain.
Right.
My horizon line was as high as it could go, and I went for it, and I was dogged, and it worked.
Yeah.
And I watched my life become more and more successful to the perspective of other people. And as I became more successful and had this kind of life that I thought I should have, I found myself feeling farther and farther away from myself. I could feel this vast expanse of what I really wanted versus what I had, even though I got what I asked for.
Yeah.
And so what did that look like? It looked like an amazing career. And then it also looked like autoimmunity and chronic fatigue. I was in a marriage that made me miserable. I was in a house that made me miserable. I lived in Los Angeles and everything looked the way it should. And I was so unhappy.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, there has to be more to life than this.
Mm. Mhm.
And how many nights can I go to sleep wondering why I feel like I'm living someone else's life or someone else's promise?
Yeah.
And so I started to make an exceptional amount of changes. And one of the good things about being a producer is you do a lot of research
Yeah.
and you're really, you're pretty intense about it. And so I started using kind of my producer brain to figure out what was missing. And it took me on quite a journey. I was very spiritual, but then I also started looking at things like attention and productivity and what happens in a practical way to our minds when we go after something and when we want something and how do we mitigate our schedules and our needs? And through that, I became an expert in work-life balance. And so I speak from both a practical perspective, but also one that is deeply rooted in the spirit or purpose work or things like that.
Mm. You just spoke to so much of what I hear coming from women that listen to the podcast and so much of my own personal story
Yeah.
in many elements and understanding that when we look from the outside and we look at a life where there's success and these resumes that are incredible, it always comes with that tone of at what cost.
hmm
Right, and I think that's what you're talking about, and so I wanna dive into that. You said, the autoimmune, so unhappy. I had to do the research. What does the life look like when we give ourselves permission? This is a big question, right? There's a million answers that can shoot off that question. But what did it look like for you when you decided that I'm going to give myself permission to change the story?
Well, the moment that kind of fulcrum point
Mm,
of shift, I think what's so frustrating is that our rock bottom is usually what we need. It would be so
absolutely.
nice if you were like, "You know what? I've had a couple of rough days in a row. I should make some changes." But no, I was like, "What if I just stay in something that made me super unhappy for a year and wonder why?" And so I really, I think everyone has that moment in isolation. Mine may or may not have been crying in a bathtub at midnight of no one else is going to save me.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you can kind of keep waiting for that lightning bolt moment, or
Mm.
you can be the lightning bolt moment where you're like, okay, I've officially done it.
Yeah.
I've spent everything I have living this other thing. And I think a really scary exercise that I can do, some people really ruminate on the past. I am someone who's very much future thinking, which is
Mhm.
why I lean towards anxiety versus, the depression. And I thought, okay, let's play this out.
Mm.
What happens if I don't make a change? What does it look like?
Mhm.
And we know what that looks like. If we all stop right now and ask ourselves for that one thing or those few things, what does this look like if I don't make the change? And we actually allow ourselves to feel that, it can be a really intense wake up call.
Yeah.
And so when I did that, and I realized that was not the life that lit me up in the marrow of my being,
Mhm.
I was like, okay, that's really scary that I have to make these changes, but are the changes that I need to make scarier than the future that is written for me right now without it?
Mhm. Mhm.
So that was really the moment. And, it switches when you think about how much energy you leak living a life that isn't yours, and you kind of decide to make that shift and you start using that energy to start
Mm.
creating something else, you can kind of feel yourself like a storm gathering electricity.
Yeah. Mm.
And
Mhm.
so I remember that was my moment of being like, okay, I'm going to really do some scary things. I'm
Yeah.
going to probably walk away from a career that I got a degree in, that I spent 15 years on. I'm going to walk away from a
Yeah.
marriage. I'm going to leave Los Angeles. Like, it was a lot.
Right.
I think that was kind of how I would describe that moment. And then I don't know if you wanted me to describe kind of what it looks like to then act from that place of permission, if that was more your question.
I do wanna talk about that. Let's put that on pause, though, because I
Yeah.
think that that goes to the next thing that we should kinda guide people
Yeah.
through. What you just described, though, I have a term for it, and it's a funny term because a lot of people go, "Well, hold on," when I say it. And we talk about, okay, life got to this place where I was just sort of the robot in the
Mm.
story, right? And I
Mhm.
didn't really love it. It was successful from the outside, but it didn't feel connected. It didn't feel genuine. And I call it screwing upward,
Mhm.
right? Like we kind of screwed this up, not in a bad way, but like we kind of screwed this up a little bit. And so now I'm going to screw it upward. I'm going to make that change, give the self the permission. Let's put a pause there and let's talk about what your true definition of balance is, because without that, I don't think that the rest of the conversation should carry forward. I think that we have to have that kind of tone first.
Yeah, I love that. My experience of balance, and this is for me, and what I found to be true with the people I work with, is when we experience life really centered in
Mm,
our self belonging or our
mhm.
inner knowing.
Yeah,
And then life is inherently in flow, in balance with who we are.
right,
And I love that you asked it in the beginning because I think most of us, if we dip our toes into the pool of work life balance or things like that, we think of, I have to have enough time for family, I have to have enough time for health and for hobbies and well being, and then for work.
right.
how do I allocate the ratio of my time in the day?
Hmm.
And that's a really different question
Right.
because we experience time differently when we're rooted in self.
Yeah.
Our priorities shift, and we are able to literally have a different type of day and a different type of experience when we rethink balance as an orientation point instead of a scheduling and ratio issue.
Mm. There are so many things that are coming to mind right now, right? And I loved what you said. Time is experienced differently when you're rooted in the self. Let's fly off of that sentence right
Yeah.
now because not only is that true, I think anybody who's done the actual healing work and or given themselves permission, which is healing work essentially, to
Mhm.
do the damn thing,
Mhm.
experiences that. And yet it's extremely difficult to describe to most people if they've never, centered around that.
I think a way that's really a fast way to start to metabolize the understanding of time as experienced differently is if you think back to when you were a kid, or if you have a
Mhm.
hobby or something that brings you into a state of flow.
Right.
When I think about it, I think about when we're in our mind, when we're in a state of reaction, time slips through our fingers. And most of us wake up late, we check our
Mhm.
phones, we're bombarded by way too much information for our brain to be able to handle.
Right.
And already our day is chaos. And we feel like there was already so much to do and we didn't do it. And we promised ourselves this and and so when we're in a state of reaction, time is this thing we're chasing. And so I love to ask people what are the things that they can do that make them feel embodied, where they're not in their mind, where they're not
Mhm.
in a place of reaction, where time felt almost elastic,
Mhm.
where it was not a factor. You know, we
Right.
Time is a really obviously, the experience of time is timeless, but our understanding of time, of having a clock on the wall, really new in
Mhm.
terms of human history.
Right.
So even having a clock in the center of town is not that's only a couple hundred years old.
Right.
Now we have a clock in our purse, in our pocket, everywhere we
Mhm.
go. So we have a really short leash to
Mhm.
where time is. When I think about the experience of time and what it means to be away from that, I think about, or I ask people, what is the thing that makes you feel totally in your own space, in your own element, in that
Mhm.
place where you are just kind of witnessing the experience?
Yeah.
And that can be an example of how time can feel different as an experience versus what is the point of your day
Yeah.
where everything hits and you're like,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
your email and there's like so many emails and you're late to pick up your kid and you never, remembered to do, freeze dinner the night before, etc.
Right.
That physical experience of what that feels like versus being in flow, I think is a really helpful way to begin to think about how we can experience time differently.
Mhm. I wanna give an example for somebody who is sitting there going, "I have no idea what that means." Like, I've never been there, right? I have tried. You're asking me to do this, but, it's blank up here, right? There's nothing flowing. And that is think of the best day you've ever had. Think of
Hmm.
that day where you weren't checking the clock, you weren't worried about the emails, you were in the moment, and when you reach the end of it, you think to yourself, "I really don't want this to end."
Hmm.
There's every human has had that day, right? You've had that day if you've had some kind of life experience. So think about that day and understand that that feeling that you have, that is that flow feeling. That is that presence feeling because time most likely was a little bit less present and it was a little bit slower.
Yeah. Yeah. Other things that I've heard are things like people who work on miniatures or things that are
Ah,
extremely absorbing in details, like
right.
making jewelry, going on a run where you don't have to be anywhere and you're in your body in this really intense way. Dancing is a really big one,
Mhm.
a lot of
Mhm.
people. So those usually come up too.
Yeah. So we need that in order to find this center space of balance. So we have the definition. I mean, the $4 billion question.
Mm.
How? How do we create it?
Yeah. I love this because I think that if we had a thing that worked for everyone, we wouldn't all of us would be exceptionally balanced.
Exactly.
And I think all the productivity books and the hacks and I mean, I love them and I think there's a lot of value in them.
Right.
I don't think they should be tossed out. Put your phone on do not disturb,
Right.
schedule your days. These things are really helpful.
Mhm.
But I think if they would work, like when we think about the people that are out of balance, we don't think about people that have no self-discipline.
Correct.
Like, if I think about the people that I know that are crazy out of balance right now, they're exceptionally successful.
Mhm.
They're really disciplined. They
Right.
show up. They're good people. They're there for their friends. These aren't people who are just, you know, out of control. So it's
Right.
not about discipline. I think it's about a combination of, I think at its core, we live in a society. I mean, it's a pretty complicated answer, but at its core, we live in a society that asks us to be in a state of reaction
Mhm.
99.9% of the day, to be extremely focused on how we are perceived as our currency of belonging and worth,
Mhm.
and that we were taught at a very young age that what we do for ourselves and what we love about ourselves isn't as valuable as what we give to the external world.
Exactly.
And when we can start to create a relationship with ourselves that disrupts that choice between authenticity versus belonging, which I know Dr.
Mhm.
Mate talks about, I love him. And we can start to choose authenticity with an enormous amount of compassion
Yes.
for what we've given up for belonging, because we're human beings and we need to belong.
Mhm.
Something really extraordinary happens.
Mhm.
And then we
Mhm.
start to belong in a whole new way, in a much deeper way as well.
Right.
But to me, it is that very subtle and transformative shift to a world of authenticity and that self belonging. And of course, there are things that we can do that facilitate that.
Mhm.
But to me, it's really rethinking balance when we think about, because the people at the end of the day, most people when they're out of balance, they say, I'm not happy.
Mhm.
I never have enough time.
Right.
And my life doesn't feel like it's my own.
Mhm.
And so the opposite of that is to be, how do I have a joy filled life?
Mhm.
How do I have my life feel like the one that truly belongs to me, that is in honor of who I am?
Mhm.
How can my days feel really satisfying? And the steps to do that are much more subtle and have to be than I think a lot of people think, which is I got to
Mhm.
start a meditation practice and I got to run every day and I got to
Mhm.
stop eating the cookies at the office or whatever. Those are all really helpful, but I don't think that's
Right.
the first step, which is why I think most people have a really hard time keeping up with what they say they want to do.
Mhm. Intentionality has to match action, which is where authenticity finds you, and it's in your behavior at that point.
Mm.
So let's talk about the subtle shifts because as a therapist, when somebody comes in, fix me. Give me
Mm.
all the tools, give me all the practices. How can I do this?
Ah.
And rightfully so, right? You're there looking for solution. And for me, it's like, what's already working? Well, nothing.
Mm.
That's bullshit. Something's working. It just is, right? So something's working for you. Probability says that not 100% of things are failing. So what's working now? And that action of finding those small shifts to begin with. So I'm interested to hear what your subtle shifts are.
And I love this especially because I've heard you talk about this before, that using your own life as evidence and
Yeah.
proof that you can do something
Yeah.
is a really exceptionally powerful reminder that it's already here.
Right. Yeah.
It showed up to the appointment with you.
Yeah.
The proof is here.
Mhm.
The subtle shifts that I often encourage are, I ask people usually to look at their days. So this is
Mm.
where practicality kind of meets this like spiritual, what
Yeah.
does it mean to belong to who I am and my soul and whatever, which is super important. But also looking at your days, because our days have giant traps in them where we're like, typically between 4 and 4:30, when I know I'm going to leave the office, I scroll social media and then I feel like hell. Or, I start my day and I do these things and I don't really love it, but I do it anyway, or things like that. So I look at the day, and each day is different, and each person's schedule looks and has different kind of adjustments that are required. But there are a few things that I always encourage to start. I have a real focus on our relationship with our phones.
Mm, mm. Yes.
I think the phone is like the fastest way that you can zap a sense of presence. I
Mhm.
don't know. You have to be an Eckhart Tolle level, if you're going to pull
Yes.
this off and stay present and be on Instagram,
Yeah.
you get all kinds of awards and accolades. I don't
Mhm.
know how you do it.
Agreed. Mhm.
So when we're experiencing our day and then we open our phone, it's almost impossible to stay in that place, which doesn't make it's like, listen, do I want to throw my phone into the nearest body of water? Yes, but I can't. And I understand that
Right.
this is going to be a part of my life. And so, something that I suggest almost always is to start the day without your phone.
Mhm. Always. Yeah.
And that usually means buying an alarm clock,
Mhm.
which people feel and sometimes people are like, "Well, I can't do that." It's like, absolutely can.
You can.
But
Yeah. You
you
can.
can, because even the neural pathways in your brain,
Mhm.
when you pick up your phone, even if you're like, "But it's on airplane mode," it is, if we're literally talking about the physiology of our brain, the dopamine, the
Mhm.
adrenaline that go
Mhm.
off when you pick up your phone, it doesn't matter how dedicated you are to balance, you're still a human being with neurotransmitters.
Yeah. Yep.
And so that's the compassion element of like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make me lazy or bad. It's that I'm a human being. And I'm not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but there are billions of dollars that have been spent for your attention.
Absolutely.
And it's
Absolutely.
it's not about you being strong. It's
Mhm.
about the fact that there's a lot of money invested in getting your eyeballs to stay right where they are on that screen.
They actually work towards making sure that you go into autopilot when you're there,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's the whole framework in which all of these social media apps and all of your phone is geared towards.
It's so calculated. I saw this recently and I add it just because I think it's exemplative of how our phones work. If you post something on Facebook or Instagram, they will purposely withhold the likes from you
Mhm.
initially so that when you go and check on it, you're disappointed.
Right.
And then you check 20 minutes later, you see so many more likes, and that dopamine hit is so much greater
Yeah.
that then you know you're going to come back a lot more.
Yeah.
And they're literally testing your dopamine levels. Like it's
Mhm.
at that level where, we really have to just be conscious and compassionate with ourselves about how we approach these things. So,
Mhm.
I always suggest starting the day without the phone. And I ask people what works for them. What is a thing that makes them feel good? For me, I do meditation. I know you're an enormous
Yes.
advocate of meditation. So I start the day, I still handle things. I have a
Mhm.
dog, I have family, so I still get up and handle things. And then I try and do my meditation before I let the world in, which is what I call turning my phone on.
Yeah.
And so I do my meditation and then I do the things that I like doing, which can be automatic writing, or, I have a few
Mhm.
things that I do right after meditation that allow me to kind of connect with where I am in that exact moment versus where I thought I'd be or what I have to do that day. And then I let the phone in. So that's like
Mhm.
one little thing that I recommend that I think can have an enormous shift for the rest of the day in
Mhm.
terms of how we relate to what shows up for us in the outside world.
I love that you said that, and you gave the example of going into meditation before allowing the world in. I know when I was training to teach meditation, I had one of the instructors who had long history in pretty much every meditation style possible said, and I remember writing it down, and I even remember the note after it, how silly I was at that time. And he said, if you go to a space where you are only writing during that time, or you're only using your phone, or you're only X, Y, and Z, that is the practice that your meditation, I'm using air quotes, will become. And I thought, well, that's stupid. Of course, that's not what's going to happen. I mean, you sit there, there's a pathway, you're doing the thing. Why would that practice become something else? Until I found myself changing my meditation practice by
Hmm.
sitting there and journaling ahead of time and doing these things and letting the world in, and then trying to get to a place where I was bringing the neuro back down and trying to find a balanced nervous system. And it was like, why is this not working?
Yeah.
Because you changed the way you did the practice, right? And
Yeah.
so letting that space be calm, be centered, find balance before going to find balance in your everyday really does change everything. I remember that so distinctly, and I remember later on coming to a space after it had been a long time of practicing meditation. It's like, what's different?
Mm.
Uh, the practice is different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then having that compassion for yourself, because where we shift is usually showing us where a belief that we hold,
Mhm.
something that we are out of balance in a more micro way, is asking for attention, is
Yeah.
asking for that realignment. I love that. And I think it if we, it sounds subtle or it sounds maybe not like high impact, because like you're
Mhm.
saying, when you have a client that meets with you, they go, "Fix me. My life is
Yeah.
on fire. I
Yeah.
need all the things. Give me all the things right now."
Mhm.
What I know about when you give someone too many things is that it goes really well for like 3 days and then it all falls apart. And then they're like, "Well, I don't want to do that anymore because that didn't work."
I love that
Which
you gave it 3 days. I love that you just gave it 3 days. It's 24 hours. It just
Yep.
24 hours. If fire is already happening and I throw
Yeah.
every single thing at you, they're like, I don't know where to go." And I'm like, "I know. That's why I told you I didn't wanna do this."
Yeah. Yeah. And I say that being the person who would 100% be like,
Yeah,
"Give me all the things, I'll do it.
yeah,
I'm different, I'll do it." And then I totally wouldn't.
yeah.
So, that little shift, here's what it looks like if we practice it a lot. Expand on this. What does that look like when you're self advocating at work?
Mm,
So, say you're self advocating at work because your boss is really terrible and you're at this job, you don't even like the industry, and the boss is just awful. And you're like, "I need to advocate for myself.
mhm,
So I am going to vocalize that this guy's a jerk or this lady is a jerk and it's just terrible and it's not fair and they're giving me more work that wasn't part of my job description and now I have to work more for less, etc." So say that is the moment. The difference is you can self advocate from a place of reaction,
mhm,
or you can self advocate from a place of knowing what you want in your life. And that has a tremendous difference in what that looks like. So, for
mhm,
instance, if your boss is an ass and says something terrible to you in a meeting that's embarrassing, and you're like, "I can't let him talk to me like this." You might want to go up to him afterwards or write an email and CC someone and say,
mhm.
"This is inappropriate.
Right.
And that is okay. And I'm 100% a fan of self-advocacy.
Yeah.
But what if you had a practice where you knew what you wanted from your career and it wasn't at this job,
Mm-hmm.
wasn't even in this industry? How would you treat this differently? And again, not saying you let yourself be a doormat, not saying that you let someone talk to you like that, but the way that you even react to that moment might be tremendously different. You might
Mm-hmm.
go, this is another example and a reminder from the universe that I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna look for another job this afternoon, which is, like, way more constructive for what you
Yeah. Yeah.
want, for what your soul or, your essence is really looking for,
Right.
and that can be the difference of that practice in the morning, of
Mm-hmm.
checking in with yourself, where you're at, what do you want? Who are you
Mm-hmm.
today in this moment? And it's those differences that can, it's like when you change the telescope 2 degrees and you look at a different solar system. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's a little bit like that. So
Yeah.
it is really powerful when we make these little changes. It might not feel like we're extinguishing the life on fire just yet,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the difference in the I'm going to do everything and I'm going to make everything change right away versus I'm going to do the really hard thing, which is get really still with myself
Mm-hmm.
when I'm someone who feels in control and powerful when I'm really busy and chaotic.
Yeah. There's so many things that you said there that I want to kind of touch a point, for each thing. The first thing is not having the reaction, right? Getting still. I call that borrowing trouble when we react automatically,
Mm.
right? We created so much trouble for ourselves because what is the landscape of that reaction? And that's really what I want people to focus on, right? That micro shift is massive when I have taken the landscape away. I reacted, didn't think this through, and now I have this barrage of activity that I have to deal with. Had I not just gotten still, the most uncomfortable thing,
Yeah.
the most uncomfortable thing. When people ask me, what's the hardest part of this work? What is going to undo me more than anything else? It's not the trauma. It's not the hopelessness. It's not the anxiety or depression. It's not the frustration. It's not that you're in the wrong place. It's that you have to be still.
Hmm.
If you have to stay with yourself for just a minute, you are most likely wanting to crawl out of your skin
Hmm.
until you learn that it's okay and safe, which
Yeah.
is what you're talking about. Like, how do I reframe this moment? I don't borrow trouble. I don't go down the landscape of creating more for myself. I go through the landscape of, does this even really matter?
Yeah. The worst thing for me in those moments is that it would be so satisfying to react. And there's a little part of me that goes, don't you do it. Listen, don't you, don't you send that email. The same instinct, which is like, it's so simple. And I hate it so much because it's so practical, because it's so not satisfying, because you want to be justified and
Yeah,
righteous in your fury.
yeah,
And you are. There's a degree where you are, right? Like,
right.
it's not invalidating your own feelings. There is a small whisper of wisdom
Mhm.
that says, there's a better thing 45 minutes from now. It's just not, it's in
Yeah.
flight.
Mhm,
It
mm,
hasn't landed yet. Just give
yeah,
yourself 45 minutes. And if you still want to send the email in 45 minutes after you've talked to a trusted friend or your partner or what have you,
yeah,
send it.
right.
That grace period is so awful and so helpful, and
Mm,
every time I've ignored it, it has not gone in the ideal way, and every time I've listened to it, something miraculous usually happens in that next 30 minutes anyway
mhm,
that changes the scenery, and then I feel really grateful to my own patience. I mean, patience is a real
yeah,
shortcoming of mine. The other thing is that we want, to honor the part of us that wants to change what just happened.
mm, 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 mm. Pause. Sit in that for just a second. There's a real part of us that wants to change the moment. I want to hold on to that. That is such a big statement. It's a simple statement, right? But that's exactly it. That's it. That's where our reaction is coming from.
Yeah.
There's something about this moment that has rocked my safety, that's rocked maybe my self-esteem, my confidence. You've hit on an old wound. There's something in this moment that you have created an experience. Now, when I say you, I don't mean the person that you're having the party with.
Mhm.
I'm talking about you as an I. Big understanding. So if you walk away with nothing else, ladies and the few gentlemen, let it be that. But keep going. Sorry, I had to.
No, I'm so glad you stopped and had that let that sink in, because that's really what's going on. That feeling of like I have to do something is really
Mhm.
like I have to change the perception of what just happened, because
Right,
humiliation will do even the slightest sprinkle of it.
right.
It's so close to any core wound of I'm not worthy, everyone's going to know I'm not lovable, everyone
Yeah,
knows that I'm not valuable, I shouldn't be here, I don't belong. So it can be that sense, but also that feeling of disrespect. We just want someone to make it right. And when we're in that state of reaction where we just have to shift the landscape, the other thing that's happening is saying, I am not in control of how I feel about myself enough to give myself what I need right now.
mm, mhm. That's point 2 right there. Yep.
And it means, though, that what you're saying is that your terrible boss named Bill can give you the right to feel at peace.
Mhm.
If you were to say it like that, you'd be like, of course, Bill can't give me a sense of peace. I hate that guy.
Right,
But that is actually what you're saying. If you wouldn't go to Bill for advice, why do you need Bill to make you feel better?
right. And why have you given Bill so much control over how you feel?
Yeah.
Why have you given that to him? For me, I was recently in a moment, and I want to give the example so that for everyone listening, they kind of take a moment and go, "Oh my God. Oh my God, this is it," right? Because all of this is essential to balance, to the
Mhm.
everyday balance piece. I was in a moment where somebody got upset with me, and of course, I had to put my therapy hat on. I was in a group setting, just kind of roped everybody in. I was like, "Oh, this is going to be bad. You don't know me well enough to know my reaction. I sure as hell don't know you well enough to know your reaction." And I kind of put the therapy hat on and I said, I'm not in control of how you're reacting in the moment. Boom, right? That's explosive to somebody. What do you mean? You did this to me. Didn't do anything. This is your reaction to the moment. Explosion number 2. I'm going to give myself permission to take away the emotional reaction right now because you're not in charge of how I feel. It's how I'm connecting. So that's exactly what you're saying is how can I step back enough to retain my power?
Yeah. And to feel like I have enough of me under me to choose
Mm,
how to handle this the way I would be proud of.
mhm,
And it takes time. I mean, that is something that it I think there's also this thing that can happen when we have a moment where someone, boops us and we feel really charged. And we're like, we know we shouldn't be that charged. We know we
mhm.
shouldn't be that upset. And we kind of that feeds that feeling of like, I
Yeah.
gotta do something to make this different.
Mhm, mhm.
And to know that time is an integral part of reorienting yourself to what just happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
Because I think when we get upset at ourselves for letting ourselves get upset, that just makes it worse. And
Mhm.
we have even less of ourselves to work with. And so just knowing, okay, this is going to take me a little bit of time. Like what you described in that moment of saying, like, I can't control the reaction that you're having.
Mhm.
I think for me, if I heard that, what's hard about that situation is that it's in a group. And when you're in a group, there's a lot of pressure to get your shit right
Sure.
really
Yeah.
quickly, which is hard because sometimes you're like, I'm not
Yeah.
ready. And I think for me, it's, I know that the parts of me that are showing up, that are blocking me from my sense of knowing everything is okay, can kind of calm down. I
Yeah.
just need a minute. And so getting familiar with that process and knowing that you have parts of you that are waiting to greet you there with
Mm-hmm.
equanimity, with grace, with balance, and you just can't see a little, it's a little foggy between right now and that moment. But having trust that you have yourself there, that self-belonging,
Mm-hmm.
you can borrow instead of borrowing trouble.
Yeah.
You can borrow that knowing that you're okay and that there's a really balanced or a response that's in alignment with how you're going to feel.
That whole point that you brought up earlier about I already have the evidence. It showed up with me,
Mhm.
right? It was already there. I already have this resiliency that I have built from the past experience where I chose to step back and take a second and not respond, or the experience that I learned of what happens when I do.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me, what I do, and this is in relationships, which I'm not very good at. I mean, I'm working on it, but I can do it a little bit more easily in a professional setting, probably also because I'm trying to save face and I'm not trying to save face as much in my
Sure.
romantic relationships.
Right.
But, a moment, that's the question I always ask myself, is what is the most loving thing I can say right now?
Mm. What a balanced question, right? Like, we're not taking the negative route. We're not taking, it's actually even a neutral route, to be honest with
Mhm.
you, because even the most loving thing can still have a twist of,
Yeah.
I wish you could see my face. If you're watching, you can, but you know, it's that wow, right? Like I'm choosing everything I have
Yeah.
right now to give you a little bit of something, right? Because we're
Yeah.
human, we're human. So the most loving thing may actually not even be the most positive thing. It may just be the most neutral thing that you have.
Yeah.
I'm reminding myself right now that you're a good person and this is a hard moment. That's neutral.
Yeah.
That's a very nice way of saying, "Please take a flying leap," right? I mean,
Yeah.
really it is. And so having that experience is massive too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm. I could see why that'd be really hard in relationships. I mean, I've been married for 21 years and with my spouse for 23, and there are times where he tests every ounce of me, and I'm like, "All right, I am walking away." Where are you
Yeah.
going? "Don't talk to me." Right? I
Yep.
mean, we all have that experience, all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, and having a few key phrases that are very neutral that you can
Mhm,
rely on, really
mhm.
helpful. So,
Yeah.
you can just kinda pull it right out of your tool belt. For my
Uh-huh.
partner, I just say, "I love you so much,
Yeah.
and loving is hard."
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I, like, cross my eyes and pass out, because it's hard. But that comment when I wanna be like, "I have a PowerPoint presentation on how you're" and
Please sit down.
instead I'm like, "I love you." But boy, it has saved me.
Mhm,
That's hard
mhm.
work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. I will often say, "We're having a moment,"
Yeah.
and he's like, "Oh, okay," I mean, because that's like, "Oh, I have disrupted something in this moment, and I now know this is gonna go one of 2 ways, and so, we're having a moment. Oof, okay."
Yeah.
So we get to this place where we're choosing, we're kind of enveloping ourselves in the acknowledgement that path A, which is our always, usually the path of most resistance because we're
Mm.
fighting against what we really truly want, versus this other path of self choosing, staying with ourselves, giving ourselves grace, compassion, the ability, that spiritual, mental, logical alignment here. How then do we put it into practice like another micro shift that we can really examine and find a new path for?
Mm. So, one of the things that I love doing in one-on-one work is I ask someone, what is a thing? Like we were talking about the moments of flow where you can feel super connected to yourself, or something that would be part of the best day ever, like you
Yeah.
mentioned. What is something? Because there's usually something that someone has craved in their life that they
Mhm.
have been totally neglecting. And there are the obvious ones, like a health diagnosis where they know they are supposed to do X, Y, and Z and they're not, or
Right.
they're in a relationship and the person's like, you don't make any time for us. That's a little bit different because those are really important, but that's not an activity that you are really digging in deep with yourself. So I
Right.
asked the person, what is the thing that brings you joy?
Yeah.
Because so many of us believe that we do not have the right or do not deserve to do the thing that brings us joy until we've gotten enough done that day.
Agreed.
Which is so tragic
Hmm.
because life is not meant to specifically labor and toil and consume.
Right. Right.
So when we ask someone, what is that thing that you love doing that
Yeah.
just makes you feel like you? And we
Hmm.
all know. And if you're listening and you don't know that specific thing, you can ask yourself what you used to do when you were a kid
Yeah.
before you unlearned a lot of this. And when you start to look at your schedule, where is the time? Do you have that even scheduled in your calendar in the next month? Which
Right.
almost no one does. But boy, do they have 4,000 Zoom calls and this
Yeah.
appointment and that appointment. So we know how to schedule, but we don't know how to schedule for ourselves because, again, of that cycle of deserving. So what we do is we can schedule it or a nut and then see what happens.
Right.
Or if someone has tried to schedule it a bunch, say someone loves going on walks every morning and they schedule it, but they never do. I ask someone, what is the reason that gets in the way?
Mm. Hmm.
And this is always really telling
Hmm.
because it's in these little moments where we see that we give away our precious moments in life.
Yeah.
It's usually work or another thing that can come up a lot is the people who have the most distinct, in my experience, I'd be so curious to hear what you think about this in your work. In my experience, the people who have the greatest struggle with work life balance are those that were praised by their caregivers for having an incredible intellect,
Hmm.
for their hard work ethic,
Hmm.
for their ability to take care of others.
Right. Yep.
And usually it's more than one, but it can just be one. That's
Yeah.
enough. And what we do at that age is we start to self sacrifice because we know it means that we can belong, which we need to survive.
Hmm.
And so usually that plays into there is a very clear line between that relationship and, oh, this is the thing that gets in the way every time I say I want to go on the walk in the morning.
Yeah.
This thing pops up and I decide that that thing has greater value
Yeah.
than my own commitment, promise, boundary with myself.
There's two big pieces that I want to talk about. I want to answer that thought process, but I also want to back up and talk about for just a second the joy piece of it.
Hmm.
What I have discovered in thousands and thousands of hours of sessions, and even in my own work that I did for myself, is most people don't have a definition that is personal when it comes to what joy actually is.
Hmm.
And so we don't have definition classes, right? It's not like we sit down and we're like, emotion A is X, Y, and
Yeah.
Z, which thank goodness we don't really, because then it takes away that ability to have that self connection to it. But if you haven't sat down and thought about what brings me joy, do it. But the
Hmm.
first piece to that, pre A work is, what does that even mean? What does joy mean to you?
Yeah.
Because what's the thing is the physical action of it. So I want you to think about that. Like, what is the definition? What's the thing that I'm going to be doing? Because that's what it looks like. And how
Yeah.
does that feel within me? Because that feeling should match the definition. So that's a big thing, right? Like that alignment of how I feel internally matches my true definition means that I'm in balance.
And when you say that, what that makes me think of is that there's almost always an element of embarrassment.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's part of it. Like, okay, it
Yeah.
brings me joy. Like, I know someone who loved laying on the hood of their car and whistling songs and watching planes land near
Hmm.
where they lived. That was like the thing that brought them so much joy. And the amount of energy it took for them to share that because it
Mhm.
was embarrassing them, it didn't seem productive.
Yeah.
They're not like an oil painter, they're not a sculptor. We
Yeah.
have kind of these ideas of the things. Again, we live in a culture of of external validation in ways that sometimes are really deleterious to our sense of self. So, being honest with yourself about
Mhm.
what joy feels like without anyone else getting to bid on the value of what you do,
Mhm. Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think is such an integral part of that because that's part of joy is that it's
Right.
just for you.
Yeah. You're not going to the store and buying a box of it, right? It's not mass produced. Okay. So that's really, what's the definition? What does it look like? What does it feel like? I will often make people do that. Like, okay, here's the list of emotions. Put your definition and do not
Mm,
open your phone and do not
mm.
open Google or Bing or any place else. Don't pick up a dictionary if you happen to have one of those, like sitting and rotting on your desk. Like, do not do it, right? Like, I want to
Yeah,
know what that means and feels like for you. And people struggle. Oh my
yeah,
gosh, the struggle. I didn't do my homework this week. Then we have nothing to talk about. Like, well, I want to talk about this. No, 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 no. You're not diverting from the work. Like, this is it. I need you to tell me what that looks like for you. I'm a little embarrassed. I don't care what your definition is. I'm not
yeah,
living that expression. You are. So
yeah.
that's the biggest thing.
And also, I think because you're asking people to feel into it. The meaning they could totally describe.
Yeah.
Oh, it's described like this, and it's in this book, and it's this thing, and it was captured by this film. The
Hmm.
feeling of it can be a real doozy.
Well, and that goes to the question that you asked and the conversation about the people who had validation based on outcome and output. When we take validation from our to-do list, and we
Mm,
take validation from the productivity, and we take validation from the outside clap based on what we were able to do, we actually take away the self identity of that feel good for the self.
mm,
It's all the value of everybody else,
mhm,
right? Like, I checked the list off. Aren't I a good girl? I mean, I
mhm.
guess. Sure, if that works for you, if that's what joy looks like for you. But it's not a real connection with the self, right? So the people that live like that, hi, former one, right? Lived there. I always can tell you their background story. There's
Hmm.
generally a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
There's generally a lot of self-preservation based on what their parents kind of had an expectation of.
Yeah.
There's a lot of quieting the inner voice,
Mhm.
no real true grounded emotional intelligence,
Mm.
and fear.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So these are some of those misnomers in life that we struggle with until we get to the point where we're like, I am sick of this job that looks successful. I'm sick of doing these things that everybody expects of me. What will my parents think if I completely abandon what I've been doing and go to this? What
Mhm.
if I was wacky and decided to teach meditation? Like, what will my friends think? It's too
Mhm.
woo woo. Like, it's all of those things. And then you say, who the hell cares?
Yeah.
Because you're not living my life. That's where that space of shift is.
Yeah. And you can have that moment. I think there's that moment of this will feel really safe for the next few days if I keep doing the same thing. And this will
Yeah.
feel really dangerous in the next few years if I keep doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. 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 The litmus test of that for me is if I get up in the morning and I find myself dreading something, I'm going to key into that because there is something about that thing, that event, that emotion, that person that needs to be looked at. Is this a feeling that I'm having just based on experience? Is there something that's telling what's off balance in this moment?
Yeah. And I think the other side of that too is that we are living in capitalism where a
Yeah.
lot of people are really stuck.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
fact that we have to work this hard and, just to have bare minimum security of healthcare,
Yeah.
education, or housing for ourselves. So, knowing that and having compassion for that and learning the difference between feeling resistance towards a system that doesn't
Yeah.
care about your experience
Yeah.
and your sovereignty, and then the difference between that and then knowing the feeling of like, okay, I keep choosing this every day and there are other things available to me. And why do I keep doing this? And I am not a greedy or a selfish person by acknowledging that this thing might not be right for me when it's right for other people, or
Yes.
this is a thing that other people really want and I don't
Mhm.
want it anymore.
Right.
And it's okay for me to admit that to myself and have the bravery to start exploring other options that might bring me more joy.
Hmm. I use the mantra with people and myself. If it's okay for someone else, it's okay for me.
Mm,
Not in the way of settling. Like don't twist those words, please. Right? But more of if it's okay for somebody else to live this expression, why am I not allowing myself to live an expression that's outward, that is bold, that is authentic, that is true to my beliefs and my compass? If I have to dumb that down, I don't want to be in that box.
yeah. Yeah. And I think seeing the other thing that I do all the time if I need a big change, this sounds so basic, but it is so central to my survival, is I will find the people that inspire me,
Hmm.
find the people that live the life that I'm interested in,
Yep.
and find the podcasts like this one
Mhm.
that really awaken that part of me that honors the hunger of a new change, of a new direction,
Yeah.
and I will inundate my life with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will buy, books on audio and I will listen to them throughout the day and I will do
Yes.
that instead of maybe listening to my friends who all also happen to hate their jobs.
Right. Yes.
Or talk to people who are really unhappy, or, and I'm gonna say this, and not everyone's gonna like it, watch the murder mystery that exemplifies the worst form of human behavior,
Why?
or step outside of the news cycle for a little bit,
Mhm.
because those things can really paralyze us in terms of taking action, and
Mhm.
if we allow ourselves to get caught up in inspiration, we can usually tap into the parts of ourselves that are really ready.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it sounds so simple, but if you really start to, I think it's called reciprocal determinism.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
when we start to really set the ratio of our day towards the change, really big things can start to happen. And we can start to identify with the parts of us that really know that something better is in store for us without as much guilt.
Mhm. When we get to this place where stuck is in the mindset and it's in the
Mhm.
language, we hear it. It's very, very present. I
Mm,
hate, I don't like. How was your day? It was okay. It was long.
I'm so tired.
I'm so tired, right? I'm drained. Stuff
Mm,
is present. Okay. It's in there. You hear it. You're experiencing it. You just may not be witnessing it. It's in those places that I will do exactly what you're just talking about and have other people do it. And I warn them, do not burn down your life. Do not burn it
yes.
down. Whatever you're doing, we're going to baby step this, right? Because you didn't get stuck in 5 minutes. Okay. So please don't try to 5 minute quick change, right? We're not getting an oil change here. We're changing our whole lives. And so we have to put those little small micro pieces in. For me, it was Dr. Wayne Dyer when I decided I am
Oh,
tired of
yeah.
living this way, right? And so consumed, consumed, consumed. And what I would do is I would put it on in the background and almost tune out and think about what caught my attention because that was such a big, oh, wait, that's it. Pause. Okay, write that down. That's something that I need to explore because I was not paying attention, but that piece caught me.
Mhm.
That's big.
I love that. And I think the point of not burning your life down is
Hmm.
so important because a lot of times people think, okay, I've officially hit my point. My life feels terrible. It feels unbearable. It doesn't feel like mine. I hate my job.
Yeah.
And they're like, I need to stop everything.
Yeah.
And obviously, we know we've seen our other friends do it. They keep moving to a new city. The problem still follows them. They
Mhm.
keep changing a relationship and the guy stays the same. We're very familiar with what this looks like on the outside.
Right.
But that part of us that really doesn't know the intricacies of how we got here and doesn't really care, all it wants is for things to feel different,
Yeah.
is totally willing to burn the place down
Oh, yeah.
just for a moment of like, well, that's not my problem anymore until it slowly builds itself back up into being a problem.
Hmm.
So those little changes, and it's almost a dare to make
Hmm.
one small step instead that you can
Hmm.
commit to. Because if you can't do that, you're not going to handle the burning the life down.
Oh, no. If you can't act in fear,
Mhm.
that's a big thing. If I cannot act from a place where I am scared, I
Mhm.
am not sure what this looks like. This is unsafe. Burning your life down is going to be more than dumpster fire that you cannot handle. You are going to end up in somebody's office,
Oh, yeah.
sick, upset, uncertain, going through a divorce, I mean, there's going to be so much stuff. Not saying that you shouldn't be doing those things, right? I'm not
Right.
saying that that's not the root cause of why you feel the way that you do. But
Yeah.
I am saying, don't do it all at once. I have so many women who have done that where they're like, so left my job today, told my husband I wanted a divorce, dropped my kids off at, grandparents' house, booked a vacation, and I'm out. Can we have an emergency session? I'm like, holy beep.
Yeah.
What the hell have you just done? Right? Like,
Right.
whose advice are you following? This is not what I want you to do.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that person just did all of those things, and when they arrive to Bali for their vacation,
Uh-huh.
they're gonna be faced with the same thing that they could have done that morning, which is to sit by themselves in
Yes.
stillness
Yeah.
and actually be with what went wrong and
Hmm.
what parts of them were they acting from to get them into this place, and how do they wanna be different, and what does their life really look like? So you can turn the volume down or you can throw the television to the bottom of the ocean, but it's
Hmm.
really much easier to just turn the volume down and be with yourself for a little bit
Yeah.
and start making changes from that place. The other thing that I think happens when you make changes from that place of stillness, where you start to have that self-belonging, is that you become irresistible and
Mm.
your world starts to treat you differently.
Yeah.
And so now you are working in collaboration with the universe
Yeah.
instead of demanding and creating, borrowing a lot of trouble, to
Yeah.
use your phrase, a lot of
Yeah.
trouble.
Yeah.
If you're dreaming about leaving your husband and, moving out of town, things that are probably really valuable if you've been dreaming of them for a while to pay attention to, or if you're dreaming of leaving your job and, really burning that down and letting everyone know what you think of them when you go, or even just leaving without a plan. I think that part of balance and self belonging is to be with yourself and start to change the relationship with yourself and allow yourself to get into alignment with the flow of your life
Hmm.
outside of your mind, which is in a
Yeah.
state of nonstop reaction. And then do it with the universe on your side.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you will be in such a hyper vigilant state of reaction to the giant tsunami of change you've just created that you're just postponing that work. That work will be
Mhm.
quietly waiting for you.
Yeah.
You can just do it now
Yeah.
when things are okay
Mhm.
and you at least have a level of stability, or you can do it way later when, everything is actually a lot harder for you.
Mhm. There's some guilt, blame, and shame that finds us in that wait, just like it finds us in the burn down. And that is, but it took me so long to get out of X, Y, and
Mm.
Z, right?
Mhm.
Like I should have done it sooner. No, you did it when it was the right time. As long as you didn't burn it down, right? Like for the people that have come in and they're like, I was in an abusive marriage and so I got a job and I started, stuffing all this money away and I quietly bid my time and I did all these things, but I have guilt, blame, and shame for taking so much time to do it. I'm like, can we give ourselves some credit for doing it in the first place?
Yeah.
Like, that's huge. It's these places of what works for, I'm going to use this word. It sounds weird. Me. What works for me? Okay.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. What's balance for Allison? What's balance for Danielle? What's balance for insert your name? What is that? You have to chase that because your balance and my balance, I know they're different,
Hmm.
right? We may have some of the same practices, but they're still different.
And I think the more we sit with ourselves and get to know who we are, when the external world, if we can really turn down the external world, which,
Hmm.
yes, is the benefit of meditation or any other type of meditative practice like
Right.
gardening or dancing or what have you, is when we get to know ourselves in that space, we become different in our external world.
Yeah.
Our ability to make choices within time shifts. And when we recognize that even the time that we took, I beat myself up a lot for how long it took me to get out of a particular relationship where I knew I was unhappy. And I look back on that and I think about the level of clearing that I had to do and how it feels like from some external perspective, oh my God, that took me way too long. But I needed it every single day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that process and unfolding to the degree that is right for me was part of self belonging. And that now that I've done that, I know I won't be back there. And
Hmm.
that's the difference. So
Hmm.
that's something that, I know because I took that time, I
Right.
won't do it again.
Yeah. Those experiences build the metrics of what is acceptable and what is balance.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's it, right? Like this experience was really hard. Okay, what did it teach you? Nothing. It was just terrible. Back up.
Yeah.
Back it up, right? Because there was something in it that you had to learn, and you did by the proxy of the experience. It's extracting that piece and then realizing, oh, wait, that is the metrics. This is how I will accept people to treat me. This is the thing that I will allow. This is what I will not allow. This is big. We do have to have those experiences. If we don't, how do we learn those next pieces? How do we ask for more? How do we get into center? It's the blueprint.
I think it's beautiful.
We have had a very in-depth conversation, one that I don't want to end, but for time we have to. What did we miss that you feel is so essential that it's necessary for someone to walk away with?
I don't know if we missed it, but I always like to reiterate that the reason why life can feel like we're chasing it and it's not ours, and we want these things and we've known we wanted these things because most people kind of know what they want to change and they don't
Hmm.
know how to do it. I think there are a lot of people, powers that be out there, that want you to think that it's because you lack the self-discipline.
Hmm.
And I know in my bones that's not it.
Yeah, agreed.
And that when we give ourselves permission to focus on self-compassion, on stillness, which the world will try and pound out of us. Why be
Mm.
still if you can be posting, if you can be consuming, if you can be producing? If you can give yourself permission to be still and to be with yourself, that your life will begin to feel like yours
Hmm.
and it will begin to transform in unimaginable ways. And my life is proof of it. And I've seen it in so many people. And
Hmm.
it feels really antithetical because I think people think if I don't think, if I take self-discipline out, well then how am I ever going to get it done?
Right.
But I ask this, you've been trying self-discipline for probably how many decades now?
Right.
How's it going? So
Mm-hmm.
that to me is, I think, when we crave balance, when we crave that feeling of wanting to live in a way that is filled to the brim with purpose and joy, that the only place that we can turn to find that in a way that is lasting is within ourselves. And to give ourselves permission to do that
Yeah.
is the most extraordinary step is the most productive
Mm-hmm.
step that
Mm-hmm.
you can take when it comes to being the heroine of your own life.
We spend a lot of time, and I mean a lot of time, making sure that we live under the standard in which we are expected. And so, permission, self advocation, sitting, finding balance, understanding it, defining it. So, we wrap up the conversation every single time by me asking one simple thing, and hopefully, you will offer it to us. And
Mm.
it is, what are 3 things that you are most grateful for in this moment?
Mm. In this moment, I am most grateful for health. I
Mm.
am in my third trimester and it is hot.
Amen.
And I'll tell you, I'm feeling it. So I would say every morning I'm grateful for that. It's an incredible reminder of being grateful for health in the moment. I would say that I am grateful for you and for everyone who is aware that there is a magic right behind the curtain we're given.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
And that seeking, I think, is what makes this life extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so I'm so grateful for that and know that there's a return that we're seeking that we can
Mhm.
find.
Mm.
And then the third thing that I would be grateful for is the support and the safety net of love that is around me and around us when we feel our most vulnerable, if we allow ourselves to be seen.
Yeah. Beautiful gratefuls. Congratulations on a beautiful experience, a life that you're bringing into the world.
Thank you.
Allison, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation, for the experience, the flow, the balance of what was created. I know that as people turn off this episode, they are left with many things to think about. And that's the whole purpose of this. What can you use for expansion? So
Mm,
thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a true joy.
You know, those moments, those conversations that fill you with new ideas and confirmation and understanding. That was this conversation with Allison. Such a great, beautiful movement in thought, in balance, and how we can best show up for ourselves. If you would like to learn more about Allison and connect with her, visit her website, which is AlisonMandell.com. It will be linked in the show notes. When you are there, take a moment to take the free quiz to find out what your greatest daily challenge is in having more time. It's specifically geared and guided to help you shift into balance. Such a great find on her website. You can also find her on social media by simply putting her name into the search. We'll also link all of the ways to connect with her in our show notes and on my personal website as well. I want to thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you've enjoyed these tips for bettering your life and are seeking daily inspiration and additional tools, if you're not following me on social media, go ahead and do so at Get Your Life Together Girl on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Clapper, YouTube, Pinterest, all of the places. You can also visit our show notes or blog and my website at getyouрлifetogethergirl.com. I'd love for you to share this episode with a family member and friend. And if you're not following the show, please do so and take a moment to review. It is the way that this information is spread to others who may need it. Again, thank you for being the best part of this audience, of this show. I'm always taking ideas from you, so please feel free to email us at getyourlifetogethergirlnow@gmail.com. Until next time, please be kind to yourself and others.